Good morning and welcome, everyone. My name is Val Benavides, and I'm the President and Executive Director of the Texas Freedom Network. And today I'm speaking on behalf of a coalition of groups that advocate for our neighborhood schools as we officially launch the Teach the Truth campaign. We have a variety of people here with us today. We will each share why teaching the truth is so important to our children and their future, and the troubles that come when a society starts to censor education. We will then share in a panel conversation, and we will, of course, welcome questions for anyone in our virtual audience. While Teach the Truth is a rally cry you have seen TFN use before, we come to you with a renewed sense of urgency. At this very moment in Texas, the stories of diverse communities are being taken from the shelves of school libraries, and the truthful history of our state and nation is being erased from public school lesson plans. We're mobilizing against censorship and book bans because every child deserves an accurate, honest, and quality education, no matter the color of their skin or where they call home. Yet, time and time again, politicians and the far right use our children as pawns for their agendas, attempting to scare parents and turn them against dedicated educators and public schools. Let me be clear, Texas students do not need book bans and censorship. What they need is an education that allows them to see themselves represented and to learn from our past in order to build a better future for themselves and our country. I send my children to public school so that they can expand their worldview, not shrink it. And I know that many Texas parents feel the same. TFN was founded 27 years ago to counter far-right ideology and politicians who legislated. And we will not remain idle as our history, the stories of Black and Brown communities, and the experiences of LGBTQIA+ people, the tragedies of the Holocaust and Native American genocide, are dismissed, devalued, and erased from public education. We never have, and we never will. We hope that you will not remain idle either. The children in your communities need you to speak up and reject censorship and book banning, and they need you to act before it's too late. Support students by proactively organizing on your local school boards, attending regular meetings, testifying at the State Board of Education, and letting your state representatives know that you will not tolerate politically motivated bans that attempt to silence our communities. As a parent, as a Texan, and as a community member, I urge you to join our movement to teach the truth today. I'm now very happy to introduce Hedrick Nichols, a Texas-based author, educator, and mom. She is also an equity advocate who works as an education consultant to help teachers and campuses who want to create an environment in which everyone feels included, regardless of their race or background. While Hedrick has multiple years of experience working with educators and speaking about inclusivity in classrooms, she also finds herself on a list of books a Texas politician wants to ban from our classrooms. Hedrick, thank you for being here. Could you please share what teaching the truth means for you?
Oh, is it my turn? Oh, I'm sorry, girl. I was texting. I just found out that my neighbor, oh my God, girl, my friend let me know. It seems that he actually took over. He's not one. I didn't know he was like not living there. When I moved here, he was already here. But it turns out he took over the house that was next door. He actually got the people that were in there, locked them all into these little bitty rooms, and started a human trafficking ring. Turns out that that's not even his house. Girl, I didn't know. Everybody in my neighborhood said that he was wonderful, that he was responsible for having us all be able to live here. But it's people that live in the closet. Turns out a whole bunch of the people, their family, their children, that they died. Because this man, well, he had all these kind of diseases they weren't used to. And I'm so sorry, honey. I am so sorry. I was on, but that's the real tea. And I'm surprised to know that that might be similar to our origin story. The bottom line is, when we only teach one side, when we teach about the Pilgrims and the Powhatan, when we teach about Bach and Beethoven, but we don't teach about Carlos Chavez or Manuel Ponce, we are doing our students a disservice. I know that even though the neighbor guy might be a really great guy who made sure that we could live here, if we don't teach about human trafficking and the suffering that those generations endured, the people who look like their descendants may be uncomfortable. And I know that most of our laws are structured so that we don't want kids to be uncomfortable, but sometimes truth is uncomfortable. As a parent, I want my son to be able to face uncomfortable truths, to disseminate information that is true and fair, that he can look at and critically examine. So I hope you understood a little bit about my allegory, and that as listeners, you will consider what she said. Please show up at your school boards, elect school board members, run for school board, run for city council. Because as a banned book author, I know all too well what it's like to write stories about people who look like me, people who look like you, but people who I didn't learn about growing up, who my son says when I do a thing called Small Bites, and he says, Mom, I never learned about, Herndon, or I never learned about Zora Neale Hurston. I never learned about Frida Kahlo. And he doesn't know about those people because our school systems are not showing a diverse representation of the heroes and the wonderful tapestry of achievements by diverse populations that have made this country what it is. So show up, vote, run, and make sure that you are not a pawn of politicians, that you give your students, your children, the opportunity to hear the truth and to discover their own truths. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hedrick. As a mom myself, I do want my children to learn about diverse populations and have an educational environment that promotes teamwork and empathy to all students. One of the main goals of the Teach the Truth campaign is to ensure that the voices of our communities are the ones making decisions about our children, and this includes LGBTQ children. Ricardo Martinez is the Executive Director of Equality Texas and is here to speak about what that means and why Equality Texas is joining the Teach the Truth campaign.
Thanks, Val. Thanks, everybody, for having me here. My name is Ricardo Martinez. I'm the Chief Executive Officer for Equality Texas, and I use he, him, his pronouns. Recently in Texas and across the country, as very many of us know, there has been a marked shift in the political climate, which is defined and has been defined by government interference, censorship, and fabricated moral panic. And while there has always been extreme voices pushing socially conservative culture wars, those voices have recently gained a platform in mainstream politics. Anti-equality forces are more coordinated than ever in their strategy, adding additional pressure and opportunities for elected officials to pursue anti-equality policies. The hallmarks of this strategy include manufacturing moral emergencies that often use LGBTQ people as a wedge issue and promote a vigilante culture that spans several intersectional issues, linking them together as the threat of woke culture. The newly created panic over critical race theory is a telling example. Critical race theory is a university-level academic framework that the general public did not previously know much about. With the injection of misinformation and fear, extreme politicians have been able to create a manufactured moral panic about whether teaching the truth about America's racial history is harmful for youth. The legislative solution was to ban this discussion in classrooms, ban classrooms from teaching about this history entirely in an attempt to erase the knowledge. The passage of HB 3979 laid the foundation to extend this moral panic to LGBTQ plus identities. In October of 2021, as Val mentioned before, a prolific anti-LGBTQ bill filer sent a letter to the Texas Education Agency asking about the prevalence of 850 books, seeking to remove any that could be challenged for causing discomfort. Of those books, 60% centered around LGBTQ stories or characters. 8% of those books spoke about race or racism, and 13% were about sex education. Whether it's at school, elections, or everyday life, we are seeing and feeling the weight of these attacks in so many ways. For youth, as battles for culture wars cement themselves in school board meetings across Texas, youth in Texas see their very humanity debated time and time again by those who are charged with their safety and education. This debate about their worthiness has impact on their mental health. These kids just survived a marathon state legislative attack on the LGBTQ community of historic proportions, during which Texas calls to crisis hotlines increased substantially, and reports of hostile school climate skyrocketed. With Texas politicians determined to attack trans people, most recently by forcing the FPS to terrorize trans kids and their loving families, biased motivated violence towards trans people continues. Adalyn Evans, Tiffany Thomas, Iris Santos, Kiera Solomon, Ms. Coco Chanel, Paloma Vasquez, and Cypress Ramos were all transgender Texans who tragically lost their lives in 2021 and early in 2022. Texas is the leading state in the murders of Black and Brown transgender women. More transgender people have lost their life here in Texas than in any other state in the last 5 years. And despite those heartbreaking consequences that I just spoke about, there are so many people pushing back on what we know to be government overreach. There's Cameron from Katy, Texas, who has been instrumental in organizing their community against attempts to remove LGBTQ resources and suicide prevention websites, taking it upon themselves to distribute BIPOC and LGBTQ affirming books. That's courage. There's also Kennedy, a Granbury ISD senior who created a petition to push back on removing books, speaking at the board meeting and saying that no government has ever banned books and been remembered in history as the good guys. These kids and communities across Texas are showing a tremendous amount of courage, and they need our support, which is why we are so incredibly happy to join the Teach the Truth campaign. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ricardo. It does feel like every day we see actions that chip away at the power for us to make decisions without government overstep. Thankfully, we're not alone in fighting for our freedoms. Another one of our Teach the Truth partners is the Intercultural Research Development Association, IDRA, and they have lots of resources for our community to actively participate in our democracy. Michelle, can you please share what IDRA has found through research and the resources that are available to all of us?
Yes, hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Michelle Castillo, and I am the Deputy Director of Advocacy for IDRA. And as Val mentioned, we are a nonprofit organization that has, for almost 50 years now, advocated for an excellent quality public school system that values all children, and that means has culturally sustaining pedagogies and curriculum, and ensures that there is authentic family engagement in schools. Last session, we were very much on the front lines together with many of our the groups present here today to mobilize students, teachers, and community leaders against the efforts to censor the accurate teaching of history. So we're very proud to partner with the Teach the Truth Coalition and continue to lead the effort to protect public schools from school censorship. And I wanted to start off by sort of acknowledging that we are living in a time where the children of our state and our country and our world are facing insurmountable challenges. Of course, we know there's the existential threat of climate change. There's, as Ricardo mentioned, racial and gender violence. There's world hunger, there's wars. And a book in this moment is not only a friend to children, it's a lifeline, it's a liberation manual. It is a reminder that we are not alone in these bleak times. It can help ensure that children see themselves and protagonists that are changing their communities and changing the world around them. That was certainly the case for me when I first read Number of the Stars in 4th grade. And I remember seeing myself in Anne Marie, who was a 10-year-old living in Nazi-occupied Denmark and had a best friend who was Jewish. Her name was Ellen. And I remember thinking I could be like Anne Marie. I could confront discrimination, oppression, genocide. I had a role to play in this larger story of the human experience. And I remember feeling very mighty. And so what these measures of banning books, of censoring curriculum mean is that our state leaders, our elected leaders, are trying to rewrite the ability to see ourselves and to be empowered to redress the wrongs of history. So since January 2021, we've seen over 37 states that have introduced laws to ban what they call divisive content in classrooms. And we are very proud to be on the front lines of ensuring that we are providing research, data, and also mobilizing and organizing to beat back those efforts to censor the accurate teaching of history. Instead of promoting books and curriculum that make children also see themselves as mighty enough to create a world that values them and nurtures their sense of wonder, our state leaders want to make our children feel isolated and excluded and small. And they want to prioritize terrorizing teachers and librarians that help our LGBTQIA+ children feel valued and cared for, instead of addressing the very real crises that are facing our state, like the foster care system or our teacher resignations and the mass exodus of educators from education. That is a real crisis. And so if we listen to the proponents of school censorship legislation and book bans, any curriculum that discusses race or affirms the experiences of our LGBTQIA+ youth is anti-American. In their version of American history, slavery, and racism, they're, deviations from or failures to live up to the authentic founding principles. What does that mean? It means that if slavery and racism are deviations from, rather than central to the American experience, then we don't have to acknowledge their legacy and role in our current everyday lives. We are absolved from the moral responsibility to remedy racism's impact on our laws, education, and housing. And that is what is so insidious about this moment, about the whitewashing of systemic inequities, of proponents of school censorship legislation, because it removes the moral responsibility to do something and the know-how, the tools for public policy in the courts and government to play a role in redressing those wrongs. And so we are not only thinking about how to play defense, but also how we must play offense. I think we recognize that even before the pandemic, our public education system was working for some children, but not all. And that's what we were and have been committed to addressing. We know that the pandemic exacerbated a lot of existing inequities in public schools, particularly for Black and Brown and LGBTQIA children and children with disabilities. And so this is why we at IDRA are really proud to be part of the Teach the Truth Coalition, because we're going to continue organizing to beat back efforts to censor our teachers, to whitewash our history, and ban our books. We are redoubling our commitment to advance a vision for public education that values the humanity of every single child, teacher, cafeteria, custodial support staff, regardless of their neighborhood zip code. Our children are the architects of hope for a more just world. I just saw it earlier with Avital. They are our mighty hope for a brighter future, and they deserve a public education that sees that in all of them. And that's the vision that, IDRA will continue to organize for, and what we're so proud to be working with the Teach the Truth Coalition on.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for that. So the sharing of information, right, and knowledge is something that humans have done for centuries. And lucky for us, we have libraries to house the centuries of learning, information, history, truth, and personal stories. I can't tell you how much libraries have meant to me as a small child in my small town, our public library that I spent my summers in, and what it meant to me in our school library too, and how much I knew the librarians and how much they helped me find all those books that I needed. And I learned so many perspectives. So we're so honored to have a librarian with us. Carolyn Foote is the head school librarian and was honored at the White House for her creativity in using technology to help students learn. Carolyn, it's a complicated time right now for librarians, and we're seeing, as we see all of these attempts at book bans. Could you please share with us a librarian's perspective on protecting a child's access to books?
Sure. So my name is Carolyn Foote, and I was a high school librarian for 29 years and an English teacher before that. And I support and believe as a librarian in students' First Amendment rights. Students, librarians, teachers, and school boards are being attacked, but what's really being attacked are students' First Amendment rights and access to reading materials. The Supreme Court actually said that removing books from libraries infringes on those rights, and schools should not be political playgrounds. So a war on books is part of the playbook that's happening right now, and it uses triggering language to get people's attention. And this language denigrates students' stories, and it denigrates librarians and students' teachers. It's been targeting books about LGBTQ students and students of color. It's targeting books that speak about race and racial history. It targets stories that are actually just now beginning to be told. And students' stories about their lives belong on the shelves of our libraries because students belong in our libraries and our schools, and their voices should be represented. And this is what librarians attempt to do. Libraries are really the best of our democracy because they represent all of us. They contain ideas about who we are as a people, where we've come from, where we're going, and librarians work hard to represent all of our communities on the shelves. Whether students are vegetarians or hunters, we have books for everyone. And students know that libraries are safe spaces and refuges for them on a campus, especially marginalized students find homes in libraries. The impact on librarians and libraries currently is that students deserve information that prepares them for the future, prepares them for college, where they may meet people from all different walks of life. It prepares them for the workplace, where they learn how to get along with others and have empathy for others. And when books are removed that help them have empathy or understanding for others, or expose them to ideas that beyond their world and their boundaries of their community, then we're doing them a disservice in terms of preparing them for the workplace and for college and for their future. It shouldn't be a radical act to believe that a library should have books in it that represent everyone and that prepare our students for the future. School board policies in districts across the state are actually written to protect every library from censorship. And we need to be sure that schools and school boards are actually following their district policies, because these policies prevent everyone from being subject to the whims of opinion, no matter what political viewpoint they come from. So as librarians, we encourage people to take actions to help protect the rights of their students, to have access to stories of all people. And that would include speaking at school board meetings, writing letters to school boards or district personnel, having rallies, speaking up, having read-ins, getting students involved, getting their parents involved. We need everyone in this fight because although librarians are on the front lines of it and certainly being denigrated in some of the political rhetoric, we are only here because we're here to serve students, and we are here to stand up for our students' rights to have access to reading materials that are meaningful windows to them, to the world, and meaningful mirrors to them about their own lives. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing, Carolyn. We very much believe that in order to prepare students for the future, we must prioritize the needs for students to learn and talk about the history and cultures of Indigenous communities, people of color, LGBTQ folks, and other marginalized communities. We also believe in listening to students and allowing them to speak with their parents about their education so that they can make the best decision for them without political influence. That's why I'm very happy to have Avital with us here today. Avital is a Texas middle school student living the reality of attempted book bans and censorship in education. Avital, could you please share with us your experience and what you'd like to say about this topic?
Hello, my name is Avital. I'm in the 6th grade and I'm 11 years old. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak. This topic is very important to me because I believe that children should have a say in their education, that it shouldn't be controlled by political battles, but what is best for us. Our schools currently hold the next generation of world leaders, doctors, teachers, and so much more. And if our education is censored and limited, then by the time we're exposed to new things, we'll meet them with bias and hate. Limiting our information will make it harder for us when we finally go into the real world. It will make things worse for minorities. It will make it harder for us to adjust to life as adults when everything is harsher, different, and full of different problems than what we had been taught to expect. Currently, my library holds books about race, gender, sexuality, and so much more. And I shouldn't have to wonder if in 5 years later, those books could still be found on the shelves. This generation is the future of our nation, and we deserve to hear the truth about our history so we aren't doomed to repeat it. We deserve to be able to see ourselves reflected in the curriculum, and we deserve to have our education not softened for the benefit of boosting someone else's political campaign. Thank you.
Avital, thank you so much. And thank you for being such a courageous leader already. We're so proud to have you with us. So what an amazing, powerful perspective of stories we've heard. And I'm honored to have each and every one of you here alongside TFN to support the importance of providing children with an accurate and honest education free from censorship. Our Teach the Truth campaign is guided by the belief that students should have an education that allows them to see themselves represented, access truthful information, and learn from our past in order to build a better future for themselves and our country. I want to acknowledge all of the partners in our coalition at this moment: Texas Freedom Network, Asian Texans for Justice, Children's Defense Fund, Equality Texas, Human Rights Campaign, Intercultural Development Research Association, Jolt Action, Pastors for Texas Children, Progress Texas, Texas American Federation of Teachers, Texas State Teachers Association, Texans for the Right to Read, and the Transgender Education Network of Texas. And this coalition is growing. If you're an organization listening in today, you can reach out and contact us. We will continue and add more and more organizations, people, and everyone who is interested in picking up this momentum with us. So I do have some follow-up questions here for our panelists that are here today. And for anyone in our virtual audience, I also invite you to post a question. Our staff will bring those forward for us. We have many folks keeping an eye on the questions, and the panelists are here to respond. So I'll start off with the first question. Hold on one second. This one. So this one is for Michelle at IDRA. What is SB 3 and the new law, and how does it affect me and my child?
Yes, so SB3 was legislation that was passed in the third special session of the 87th legislature. It's the law that's been in effect since December. And we actually have a really great guide on SB3 for teachers, parents, and families that I'll make sure that we drop in the link for folks who are interested to have. That was written by colleague Dr. Chloe Latham-Sykes and by my colleague Irene as well. The primary so the primary thing to note is that the Texas Education Agency, or TEA, has not provided school districts up until this point with real guidance about what the legislation entails. And so a lot of the legislation is up to the districts to interpret. And so that is why we have seen districts like Katy or Carrollton ISD that have interpreted the law in very, very different ways. Of course, Carrollton, we saw, I think it was in November, where there was a educator that was talking about both sidesism, about the Holocaust. And this is all coming against the backdrop of the lack of guidance. Why has there been a lack of guidance? This was a very, very, very contentious legislation. It was known by some as the anti-CRT bill or anti-CRT legislation, but really it was school censorship legislation because it very much micromanages what teachers can teach, what events they can talk about in their classrooms, with the intent very much of ensuring that children do not have the discussions about how racism still exists today and the effects and the impacts around them. So basically undermining the ability to connect our history to our current events today. And it is legislation and language that we have seen crop up in other states as well, very similar language. And so we know that this is an effort that is very much organized at a national level that we're seeing. And it's an attack on public education and our ability to teach accurate history.
Thank you, Michelle. So another question we have, and I think that this could definitely be responded to by Carolyn, Avital, and Ricardo, is why is it important for LGBTQ students to see themselves represented in books at school if they can do that at home?
I think, first of all, if I'll start off, you know, there is an assumption here that every child has books in their home. And that's a big assumption because many households do not have collections of books in their home or income to purchase those books. Nor does every community in Texas have access to a public library. And students below 16 also cannot drive a car, and some over 16 don't have access to a car in their family. So we need to think about that school libraries are the type of library that every student has access to because it's in their own school building. But first of all, or second of all, schools serve every student, and LGBTQ students are part of every school population. And so just like any other student in our school, as I mentioned, just like hunters and just like vegetarians, students deserve to have books that represent their stories on the shelf of the library. It would be discriminatory not to be offering those books in our libraries. And so that's why librarians work hard to make sure that they have balanced and diverse collections. And frankly, because publishing hasn't kept up with or didn't include as many diverse voices over time, that's been a real effort by publishers and librarians to make sure that the representation in our schools was effective. And frankly, we're underserving some populations still because there just aren't materials out there. So it's not that we're overserving certain populations of students.
I would just add, go ahead, Avital.
Okay, so there's another thing is that being able to see yourself reflected in books can mean a lot. And then not only that, but you can learn things through books. Like in my free time, normally after all the homework I have to get done, I just want to go to bed. And I don't have time to go looking on the internet to see, okay, so I'm not attracted to guys. What does that mean for me? Like, what does that mean? But if I were to go into my library when my class is going to the library and my advisory goes into the library, and I can look for books that can tell me more about things, like it's almost like when you know how if you feel sick and you're tracking your symptoms, it's like that, except it's the books are able to help me realize and help other people realize that they aren't the only ones in this world that are having the same experience as them. Like they're not alone. And a lot of the times that can be like a sanctuary of safety. And in a school, my school is giant and it's not always easy to find people like you. And so it could, like, books would be like a sanctuary for me where I can be like, I'm not the only one in the world like this. And there's nothing wrong with me. I'm just slightly different.
Just expanding on that really quickly, the theme of safety, I think there's an assumption made here that LGBTQ kids, all LGBTQ kids have affirming homes, right? Oftentimes, parents don't necessarily understand LGBTQ kids and they don't know how to affirm their identities, right? And oftentimes the only affirmation that LGBTQ kids can receive during pivotal moments of their life when they need the affirmation, love, and support is through books and through seeing themselves reflected positively outside of the home, where safety, school sometimes is the only safe place that they have, right? Speaking from my personal experience alone, I was very lucky to have parents who were incredibly supportive of me and my identity, but I also had a lot of family members who weren't, and who were outright homophobic and transphobic. And for me, it was important to be able to see myself and the intersections of my identity in these books, right? And when I think about kids who are like me, who live at the intersections of various identities, with each one of those intersections being erased, it pains my heart to know that there may be someone who doesn't see themselves reflected or mirrored in their experience. And that's just heartbreaking.
Thank you so much, all of you, for all of those words. They're very powerful. So we have another question that was saying that Ms. Castillo mentioned that the coalition must go on the offense rather than just playing defense. What actions do you expect this group to take now that it has formed? So I have some ideas. I'll just kick this off, and then any other panelists who want to join in, please do. So at the heart of this campaign is standing up for our public school educators, our librarians, and the students of Texas. And so what it means to be proactive is to be involved, is to be civically engaged, is to not just be reactive and learn about things that are happening after they've happened, after the fact. So this is a moment. This is a moment to go on notice and for communities with us to start mobilizing. So, it's not super sexy, exciting things. It is really getting involved at the school board level. It's getting involved in learning about the State Board of Education, which actually controls everything in the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills or Standards, the TEKS that are taught, right? Everything in public school curriculum from kindergarten through the 12th grade. So we know these adoptions are coming up. This year, the State Board of Education will be going through a social studies adoption. Many of these pieces are very relevant to it. So this campaign aims to help communities mobilize, to give them the tools and the resources. The organizations that we work with, IDRA, Quality Texas, so many others of our partners have resources and materials on how to advocate, on how to testify for the first time if you never have, on how to be present in your community, on how to speak to your representatives, on how to get out there and vote, right? How to learn about these things and to do that. So, our campaign will also include online organizing, digital campaigning strategies, and things like that. It'll be on our website, which is www.tfn.org/truth. And people can sign up, they can receive the resources, they can receive an organizing toolkit. There will also be a section that will allow for open reporting. So reporting of incidents of school censorship and the ability to take larger steps and actions that are focused on applying pressure to discourage politicians, for politicizing schools for their own personal gain, their own political gain. So that's really at base. And so you'll see the type of tactics that go along with that, the things that I've mentioned, possible rallies, possible big other moments. I think it'll be a really creative campaign that has a lot of different facets for organizing. Would any of our other panelists like to chime in on that?
Yes, thank you, Val. And the only thing that I would add to the question about what does playing offense look like in all of the actions and sort of the advocacy work that we do is to recognize the importance of the power of story. There's a reason why they have gone after books and stories. I think about every sort of major faith tradition and how their prophets or deities would teach through stories, because stories allowed one to connect with values and to provide an opportunity for humans to reflect and to change their actions, to align their values. And when I think about advancing on an offensive vision of public education, it's the story that we want to tell next about the role of public education in our democracy. We've never truly had a multicultural democracy. It has always excluded folks. And we are at a juncture in our history. We've expanded civil rights in the 70s and the 60s, and all of those are being rolled back. And I've heard public education described as the smallest unit of democracy, and I love that, because public education, our public schools, are models for what our multicultural democracy can truly look like. And so in this action of going to our school boards, of going to the legislature, of going to the State Board of Education, it's advancing a story about the power of public education to create the democracy that truly values every single child, every single community. And that's what I mean when I said an offensive vision for public education.
Thank you, Michelle. So one of the nuts and bolts questions is, how can people be involved in school decisions and how do they get made? So a little piece about this, I'll speak a little bit to it, but would love anyone else to chime in as well. A big piece of this is things that get decided in schools can largely be controlled by a school board. So the school board has a lot of power in the local school district around what can happen and not happen in schools. That's why it's important for community members to be involved with school board leaders, to have conversations with them. They're community members too, so very accessible. And that's a big part of organizing and a big part of having some of those initial conversations, attending the meetings that are open to the public, signing up to testify. Those are important ways to have influence there. As I talked about briefly, the Texas State Board of Education is one of the largest bodies of elected officials in the state, and they control everything that is learned in Texas public education on every subject. That is their purview. That is what they work to do. They review the standards The standards are what textbooks are based upon and what curriculum then happens. We still talk about Texas being a really big and important state for the nation. That's why our State Board of Education is really important, is because what happens here doesn't just stay in Texas, it goes everywhere else, because we're one of the largest states to purchase textbooks. So even though there's still a lot of online curriculum now, there's a lot of textbooks still being bought, and they don't tailor all of the textbooks to different states. So it's really important for Texas to get it right. So that adoption process happens with committees of experts, with educators who review the standards and make recommendations. There is time to be a part of public testimony on that, and to assemble and attend those meetings as well, to meet those members as well. Those are all opportunities and all ways in which this curriculum in Texas gets made. Michelle or Carolyn, would you like to chime in?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Of course, I concur with everything that you said. And as far as the State Board of Education, one thing I did want to draw people's attention to is that the governor did direct the State Board of Education and TSLAC, which is the Library Archives Commission, to rewrite the library standards, which were actually just rewritten a couple of years ago, to make sure that mature materials don't appear in school libraries anymore. So weighing in with your State Board of Education members about the importance of many stories being told in libraries. That is a key thing right now, because that is something that they are currently engaged in. And then secondly, I just wanted to affirm what you said about certainly school board meetings. There actually have been pretty exciting this year all over the state. So lest you think they might be boring. Even if you can't attend, most school board meetings are live streamed on the school district's board policy website. And if you just even watch the meeting, then that makes you more informed in case you wanted to write letters to the school board members. Also contacting school district superintendents and curriculum personnel. And I encourage everyone to come from a place of deep respect, because it's been a very challenging year for school board superintendents, teachers, librarians. But asking questions out of curiosity, opening up those conversations about if districts are following their processes to protect from censorship on the shelves of the libraries, and asserting why it's important to you and your family and your community is so important, that they hear from those positive voices right now.
You mind if I add one last thing, Val? I think what folks need to, or how they can plug into this work, is just really just informing themselves about what's happening in their local communities, right? Oftentimes, it's the more local stuff that we kind of have some unawareness of, and there are known bans or reviews that are happening already, right? If we think about Central Texas, it's Bastrop and Eanes and Lake Travis and Leandra and Round Rock. When we think about East Texas, it's Clear Creek, it's Katy, it's Lamar, it's Spring Branch ISD, it's Tyler, it's Whaler. When we think about North Texas, it's Carroll ISD, Denton, Granbury, Keller, McKinney, Prosper. South Texas would be San Antonio's NEISD, and West Texas would be Ganituyo and Socorro ISD, right? Like these are happening everywhere, and folks don't have general awareness that these are actively happening as we speak right now. And these are the ones that we know of, right? And then there's these situations that are happening in public schools with Cosby and Victoria and Irving and Tyler public libraries. This is happening now. It is happening often, and the frequency and recency of these things just continues to be recent. So I would just urge folks to just pay attention. There are always school board meeting notes that you can go back and look through the last couple of meetings that'll give you an idea of where these situations may be.
There's another question asking about the webpage, how it includes an option to report book bans and challenges. and wanting to know how that information would be used. Thank you for this question. The way that information will be used in the most immediate sense is so that the organizations here can help, so that we can know that that is happening, and if people want to get involved locally with their school board in that area, that we can help people organize around that and create some help, some traction there for the work that they want to do there with their school board. So thank you for your question. And I think that is all of our questions for today. So I would like to thank everyone on this panel. This has been a very fruitful discussion, incredibly informative. I'm very proud to stand alongside all of these organizations, authors like Hedrick, and students like Avital, who we will fight for every day. So thank you so much. And I hope that every single one of you signs up right now and joins the Teach the Truth campaign with us. Have a great day.